Yes, we are focusing on a presidential election, but we are examining for the fourth time the role of Russians in the 2016 election, 4 years ago. And more importantly, we are discussing President Trump's conclusion, despite intelligence evidence to the contrary, that the Russian collusion was a hoax. For this Senate Judiciary Committee, it's all about Hillary. It's all about outgoing President Trump's bizarre theories of justice. This is a last-ditch, desperate undertaking to deal with President Trump's grievances about that election. We've all conceded the point. Carter Page was not treated properly. Both sides of the aisle have said as much. How many more times do we need to say it? I want to say it again today because I still believe it. But what are we actually facing here? What is the state of play in America today that the Senate Judiciary Committee might be interested in? Well, let's take a few items. We did have an election, a landmark moment in history. A sitting president, Donald Trump, who has routinely disrespected the rule of law, undermined democratic institutions, put his own interest ahead of the interests of the American people, ignored science and public health when it comes to this pandemic, and violated basic standards of honesty and decency. In unprecedented numbers, a clear majority of Americans voted to say, that's it, we're finished with you, and replace him with President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, incidentally 2 senators who've served honorably on this committee. The election sent a clear message. It's time to stop relitigating issues of the last election. It's time, finally, to put behind us the divisiveness and vitriol of the Trump era and to bring our fractured country together to address COVID, number one, and put our economy back on its feet. But here we are today, 7 days after that election, and our committee is holding another partisan hearing to advance President Trump's theories. This is the 4th hearing this year on the last administration, the previous administration's Justice Department, in response to President Trump's repeated calls to investigate the investigators and to try to rewrite the story of Russia's involvement in the 2016 campaign. Meanwhile, the Senate Judiciary Committee that we sit on here hasn't held a single oversight hearing on the Trump administration's Justice Department in this Congress. Any issues we might want to raise? I can think of a few. Perhaps we might even investigate the Department of Homeland Security and their zero-tolerance policy. I regret what happened to Carter Page, and I've said so before, but I also regret what happened to 2,200 infants, toddlers, and children who were physically removed from their parents by the zero-tolerance policy of the Trump administration, and the fact that 545 of those children still are in an abandoned status today. 545. So my question, as has been asked to the witness before us today, is who should be held responsible? Why wouldn't the Senate Judiciary Committee even care to have a hearing? Why wouldn't the Immigration Subcommittee, which I am a ranking member on with the senator from Texas, even have one hearing on that issue? None. But this is the 4th hearing we're having, going back over this well-plowed ground. There are some timely issues related to the Department of Justice we might even have considered today. Let me give you one. Yesterday, Attorney General Bill Barr issued a memo authorizing federal prosecutors to, quote, pursue substantial allegations of voting and vote tabulation irregularities prior to the certification of elections. The Attorney General's memo represents another instance of his sacrificing the reputation of the Department of Justice to serve the political interests of President Donald Trump. Attorney General Barr is clearly attempting to fabricate a veneer of legitimacy for the baseless claims of voter fraud made by President Trump and his supporters. And he's doing so by overriding long-standing Department of Justice policies that were put in place to prevent this very type of political interference in an election season. Let me tell you what the previous guidelines that previous attorney generals honored said. Quote, public knowledge of a criminal investigation could impact the adjudication of election litigation and contest in state courts. Accordingly, it is the general policy of the Justice Department not to conduct overt investigations." End of quote. Attorney General Barr jettisoned that standard yesterday. The Barr memo prompted the Department of Justice Director of Election Crimes Branch to resign from his position. An issue the Senate Judiciary Committee might want to be concerned about? No, I'm sorry. We're back relitigating the 2016 election. We're going to go through that all over again, maybe a fifth time, instead of asking pertinent and relevant questions about what's happening today. Mr. Richard Pilger, who resigned from that position, noted that Barr's memo, quote, abrogated the 40-year-old non-interference policy for ballot fraud allegations in the period prior to elections becoming certified and uncontested, end of quote. When General Barr came before me in my office, I asked him point blank, why do you want to be Donald Trump's Attorney General? Well, he said, you should have seen the list of other people who might have been also considered. I thought that I should step in at that point. And secondly, he said, I want to preserve the reputation of the Department of Justice. Is there anyone on or off this committee who believes that General Barr's actions yesterday preserve the integrity of the Department of Justice, where baseless claims are being made about voter fraud? Do you know what the litigants' record is in court since the election, protesting the outcome of the election? 0 for 10. They have no evidence whatsoever of election fraud. If they did, they would certainly bring it forward. I want to close by thanking former President George W. Bush of Texas for stepping up and doing the honorable thing and acknowledging to now President-elect Joe Biden that he did win, that he will be the next president, and he, President Bush, as a proud Republican, thought that that was time for him to step up for the good of the Republic. I yield.
Thanks, Senator Durbin. I would like to respond to some of the comments you made about the committee, what we're doing and why. Number one, we are going to investigate how the Carter Page warrant application was submitted numerous times to the FISA court with inaccurate information. I think it's important to have every person who signed it say, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have signed it. To me, it's actually pretty stunning. And the committee in September the 29th received information for Director Radcliffe that in September of 2016, September the 7th, the CIA informs the FBI that candidate Hillary Clinton approved of a plan concerning U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump and Russia hackers hampering U.S. elections as a means of distracting the public from her use of a private mail server. And if you go look at the classified information, there's more there. And I guess what we're saying is that you accept without any doubt that the FBI should have looked at all things Trump based on Papadopoulos, that it would have been a dereliction of duty not to do so. What we're suggesting is that when the CIA informs the FBI that Hillary Clinton may have signed off on a plan to link Trump to Russia for political reasons, nobody did anything. There wasn't an investigation opened. Mr. McCabe didn't even know about it. The FBI director says it didn't ring a bell. The person it went to was Peter Strzok, who was incredibly biased against President Trump. So I guess what we're saying, if you believe it would have been a dereliction of duty not to look at Trump based on a statement by the Australian ambassador to the United Kingdom regarding a bar conversation in London that led to everything we've dealt with for 2.5 years, we were wondering, just out loud here, how could you ignore the CIA information provided to the FBI that the Democratic candidate for president signed off on a plan to link Trump to Russia for political reasons, which may explain some of the garbage of Crossfire Hurricane? Now, you're okay with that. We're not. You're absolutely, perfectly fine with the fact that the Democratic candidate for president of the United States in 2016, the CIA had information she signed off on a plan to link the Republican candidate to Russia for political purposes, and nobody did anything. You're absolutely fine with that. We are not. That is a big deal to me, because this won't be the last election we'll ever have. And you can't live in a country this way. You can't live in a country where they take a CIA lead and put it in the garbage can and nobody do anything. That's just not fair to this country. That's That's got to stop. You can't have two standards. Will you help me make sure Mueller doesn't get fired? Yes. Mueller got to do his job. Well, here's what we're upset about. Nobody took allegations from the CIA seriously about Hillary Clinton's effort to sign off on a plan. It may not be true, but somebody should have looked at it. Nobody cared over there. I think most people on this side of the aisle believe that when it came to Clinton and Trump, the FBI and all the people involved with Crossfire Hurricane shut out anything that would change the narrative that Trump was being involved with the Russians. They ignored every stop sign about Carter Page. They kept ignoring information because they wanted an outcome. And they didn't lift a finger to investigate a lead from our own CIA.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, what you've just said is so alarming that we should have had somewhere along the way a thorough, nonpartisan investigation of this whole Crossfire Hurricane. Well, it turns out we did. Inspector General Michael Horowitz in December of 2019 found that FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation was, quote, opened for an authorized purpose, had adequate factual predication, and was not influenced by bias. FBI Director Christopher Wray agreed. That isn't what President Trump or Attorney General Barr or perhaps members of this committee wanted to hear, so they've tried to reopen that independent IG investigation in every partisan way imaginable, and this is the fourth try in this committee. Enough!
Well, with all due respect, Senator Durbin, does it not bother you at all that the CIA tells the FBI of a plan that Hillary Clinton may have signed off on and nobody looked at it?
May I jump in?
Please.
Actually, it doesn't.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why it doesn't. The FBI is an agency of limited and specific jurisdiction. It has the ability to pursue predicated criminal investigations, and I think we've all agreed that a political campaign choosing to tie politically the opponent to a foreign country is not a criminal act. The Trump campaign tried to do that to Joe Biden with China all through this campaign. It's not a criminal act. And if you're looking at this as a counterintelligence investigation, the obvious difference is that the information that the FBI was receiving about Carter Page and the Trump campaign is that there were contacts between Russian intelligence operatives and Trump campaign operatives. When you have contacts going on, that does light up a flag on a counterintelligence front. And I don't see how anybody could disagree that that's the case. But when you have a campaign making its internal campaign policy to try to say either, well, Biden's too close to China and you can't trust him, or Trump's too close to Russia and you can't trust him, I don't think the FBI has a lot of business interfering in that type of public campaign political debate. And I would bet you that if the FBI was looking at what the Trump campaign said about Biden with respect to China and whether they had a strategy to try to tie Biden to Trump, you would be beside yourself with irritation and anger that the FBI had taken that step. And yet here you're excoriating the FBI for staying away from taking that step with respect to an internal political strategy of the Hillary campaign.
Right.
I don't see how that gets you to either criminality or the type of contacts with a foreign power that raise counterintelligence concerns. So that's you keep asking this question, there's my answer.
Well, let me give you my reply to your answer and we'll get to Senator Lee. In this case, there was no criminal investigation opened. It was all counterintelligence based on a conversation by the Australian ambassador to the United Kingdom with Papadopoulos in a bar, and we got the tapes. And Papadopoulos said on tape, no, I'm not working with the Russians, that'd be treason. They used that snippet to open up what now is called Crossfire Hurricane in the Mueller investigation. I guess the one thing you're overlooking here is that the Steele dossier was prepared by Christopher Steele, who was on the payroll of the Democratic Party. He was working through Fusion GPS that was being paid by the Democratic Party. He created a document that was a bunch of garbage. The State Department calls over to the FBI and says, this guy wants Trump not to win in the worst way. Bruce Orr and a bunch of other people warned the FBI that the Christopher Steele document is suspect at best. The CIA informs the FBI that it's internet rumor. So this is a situation where if the Clinton campaign in fact created this impression that Trump was working with the Russians through Christopher Steele, who was on the payroll, that yeah, maybe that makes it all make sense. Maybe that explains that this dossier was prepared by a political person, by a person on the payroll that was used to get a warrant against an American citizen. This is the first time I know of that opposition research winds up being used by the FBI to get a warrant against an American citizen, a member of the other campaign. I am very sad that the CIA's information about Hillary Clinton signing off on a plan to link Trump to Russia wasn't looked at, because if you had looked at it, that may have explained Christopher Steele in the dossier. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. According to Bill Priestap's handwritten notes from the January 24th, 2017 meeting, a meeting that you, Mr. McCabe, attended, the FBI's strategy with General Michael Flynn was to, quote, get him to lie so we can prosecute him or get him fired. And also, quote, if we can get him to admit to breaking the Logan Act, give the facts to the Department of Justice and have them decide, close quote. Mr. McCabe, is it typical for leadership at the FBI to strategize as to how to get subjects of an investigation to lie, as in this case, in an informal interview without counsel present?
Well, I can't, I'm not going to speak for Mr. Priestap's notes, but
No,
I can tell you.
I'm just asking you whether it's typical.
I can tell you that it is common to discuss before an interview the many different ways that that interview might turn out. And one of those ways is that the subject or the witness you are interviewing might be deliberately deceptive. And so it is common to think through how you would handle that.
Okay. Now, in his 302 interview, Peter Strzok stated, quote, before the interview, McCabe, the FBI general counsel, and others decided agents would not warn Flynn that it was a crime to lie during an FBI interview because they wanted Flynn to be relaxed, and they were concerned that giving warnings might adversely affect the rapport, close quote. Is it normal for FBI leadership to instruct agents to not inform interviewees of their rights in investigational interviews?
There is no requirement to tell any witness or interviewee that it is a crime to lie to the FBI. Okay. It is very common for agents and their supervisors to discuss how they're going to handle these different elements of an interview before they go in and do it.
But I assume you don't do that all the time, and one of the reasons you don't do that all the time is because you rely on informal interviews. You get a lot of information out of them, and if you're constantly warning them in advance and making them feel like they're targets, that's a problem. But it also can become a problem, and it invariably does, when people in an informal interview are lured into an informal interview with one set of expectations that you've created for them, and you routinely dash them. Now, when scheduling the January 24th meeting with General Flynn, you threatened to elevate the issue of Flynn's call with Kislyak to the Department of Justice if he appeared at the interview with counsel. Statements made by General Flynn during this very same interview, where you advised him to appear also, were used as the basis for his prosecution. So is it standard practice for the FBI to threaten high-level administration officials if they refuse to appear for interviews without counsel, or at least without somebody from the White House counsel's office?
Well, the premise of your question is absolutely false. I did not threaten General Flynn with anything. General Flynn and I, during a very short conversation, I asked General Flynn if he wanted to have a representative from the White House counsel's office or his own attorney attend the interview, and I simply told him that if that were the case, that I would need the agents to also bring an attorney from the Department of Justice. Yep. General Flynn very quickly replied that he didn't want to bring an attorney to the interview, which is certainly his right, and we proceeded in that way.
Okay. I'm looking at your notes regarding your conversation with General Flynn. Quote, I explained to Lieutenant General Flynn that my desire was to have 2 of my agents interview him as quickly, quietly, and discreetly as possible. He agreed and offered to meet with the agents today. We had some discussion about timing and ultimately agreed to conduct the interview at his office in the White House at 14:30 this afternoon. I explained that I thought the quickest way to get this done was to have a conversation between him and the agents only. I further stated that if General Flynn wished to include anyone else in the meeting, like the White House counsel, for instance, that I would need to involve the Department of Justice. He stated that this would not be necessary and agreed with the agents without any additional participants. That, to me, at least carries a certain suggestion. Now, based on Sally Yates's 302, Director Comey admitted that he would have informed the Obama White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, if this were occurring under analogous circumstances with President Obama and President Obama's national security advisor. So why this disparate treatment? Why would you have one standard where you would inform the Chief of Staff in one instance, but not in another administration?
Well, sir, I can't speak for why Jim Comey, what Jim Comey thought about that at the time. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Mr. McCabe, we've hauled in a few different people to talk about the Crossfire Hurricane investigation in front of this committee. And so far, we haven't been able to get a single straight answer to some critical questions, including who in leadership at the FBI or at the Department of Justice knew about the serious flaws contained in the Carter Page FISA warrants before the original application was submitted on October 21st, 2016. Also, who knew by the time that the first renewal was submitted on January 12th, 2017? Or how about the second renewal on April 7th, 2017? And most importantly for today's purposes, who knew when you signed the third renewal on June 28th, 2017? Nobody seems to be telling us anything. Now, back in August, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates told this committee that she had no idea where critical factual errors in the initial Carter Page application. She had no idea that those were there. A few weeks ago, Director Comey told this committee that he didn't know about the errors when he signed the initial applications and the subsequent renewals. And now you've told this committee what is your answer to these questions? Tell me what you were aware of as of those dates.
Well, I've been pretty clear that I was not aware of the errors that are identified in the IG's report or any other errors that were present in the package that I signed in June of 2017.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expiring. Could I get an additional 2 minutes? I think I can wrap this up in that time. Thank you. Now, you've stated in your written testimony that, quote, FISA remains one of the most important tools in our country's efforts to protect national security. The FBI is the custodian of that tool. I fully support every effort to ensure that the FBI's use of FISA maintains the high standards of the court and the American people that they demand and they deserve. Well, that's all well and good. I like the statement as far as it goes, but I would note, Mr. McCabe, that I've heard this line before. Not just once, I've heard it more times than I can possibly count over the last 10 years while I've been sitting on this committee. In fact, your comments are nearly identical to those that I've heard from FBI official after FBI official, from basically every FBI official who's testified in front of this committee on this issue. Trust us. We're the good guys. And we need these secret surveillance authorities in order to keep you safe. And furthermore, you don't need to worry about them. These aren't the droids you were looking for, because we're the good guys and we require a high level of approval. Well, it turns out, Mr. McCabe, none of the people involved in the high level of approval, those same people who have told me over and over again over the last decade that they were reviewing them and that that's why it was okay, none of them can answer these questions. So that's why we're here again. So I'm asking you now, how are we supposed to tell the American people to have confidence in the secretive FISA surveillance process if, mind you, this is hard to believe, no one in FBI leadership, no one in leadership of DOJ or FBI wants to admit that they were aware of serious flaws in a very high-profile investigation. And what assurances could you possibly give us that the FISA applications targeting everyday Americans, just U.S. citizens, not foreign suspected terrorists, and not even high-profile government officials in the United States, are subject to any stricter scrutiny? They simply can't be. The fact is, the FISA process must be reformed. We can't ask Americans to continue to give the federal government this enormous amount of unsupervised scrutiny and discretion, only to have it abused by this, and only to have the people who are accountable for it say they have no idea how these things happen. I can assure you that your abuse of the FISA process has cost you the trust of the American people. That in and of itself is tragic, and I don't use those words lightly. What's even more tragic is that they've cost a great agency, one that I worked with as a federal prosecutor and for which I've had great respect, and where there are still countless hardworking, honest men and women who earn the FBI's good name every day. Their reputation has been sullied, and the Bureau's ability to do its job has been seriously impaired by these missteps. That's why this structure must change, and I won't rest until it does.
Mr. McCabe, would you like to respond?
Sure. So I certainly can't respond to things that other people have said to Senator Lee over the last 10 years. I do agree with you that this process, the IG's oversight, the report that they delivered, has uncovered that there are problems with the way, potentially, with the way that the FBI is handling its FISA responsibilities. I think I'm fairly confident in saying that this experience has exposed, to me at least, that we have been overconfident in the process that we've been using for years. We've been overconfident in that in the oversight that we have been subjecting each FISA package to. And I think that we need to go back and very, thoroughly look at how do we change that process to ensure that the errors and the omissions in these packages that we now know about don't happen again. I agree with you in that respect, Senator.
It won't change. We have to change it. It's the law that's the problem. It gives an unfair amount of discretion to human beings who have proven time and again they can't be trusted with it. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, let me just say that given the errors and omissions that everybody concedes and knows were in the FISA warrant, no official would say now that they'd sign that warrant knowing that it had errors and omissions. So that's an obvious question. What I want to make sure of is that it doesn't lead to the wrong implication that because officials wouldn't sign a warrant that they knew to have errors and omissions in it, that had they found out that there are errors and omissions in it, they would have ended the investigation. That is not a logical leap. That is not a correct assertion or a correct implication. What you do is you go back and you clear out the errors and omissions. You take whatever personnel action is necessary against the people responsible for those errors and omissions, and then you proceed with your case with a correct warrant. So let's just make sure that that is clear. I think we agree on that, but I want to clarify that. I also got to say, I've got no objection to us pursuing endlessly the question of this Crossfire Hurricane investigation, but it does irk me that we do this at the expense of other things we could be looking at and should be looking at. If you haven't read Judge Gleason's brief for a federal judge in the Flynn case, it's one of the most astonishing pieces. First of all, it's just an amazingly good piece of legal writing. So if you're a law student out there or a young lawyer, go read it just to watch the skill of a terrific advocate at work. But the allegations and concerns that a retired federal judge on behalf of a sitting federal judge has made about the Department of Justice are unprecedented. And what attention have we given that? None. There is very likely mischief behind the antitrust letter that was sent out to auto companies who had the nerve to try to interfere with the fossil fuel industry's scheme to undo vehicle emission standards. There's no support for that. It's since been withdrawn. The hearing continues to be postponed, and I still have got zero evidence or information in relation to my requests about that. We have what appears to have been a tanked FBI investigation in the Kavanaugh hearings, and I've asked questions about that, to which I've had no answer whatsoever. We've had multiple resignations in protest by career DOJ officials under Attorney General Barr, and we can't get any answers to what's going on behind those resignations in protest. And now 2 federal courts have written official opinions, decisions, excoriating the work of the Office of Legal Counsel, and nothing on that. So we're highly selective in what we choose to look into, and we've been extremely solicitous of the stonewalling and non-responsiveness of this Department of Justice. Well, guys, we're about to go into a Biden Department of Justice. And if the standard you want to set is that the Department of Justice doesn't have to answer any letters, doesn't have to answer any QFRs, only does things for the majority party, congratulations, because you've done a really good job of setting that precedent in this committee. You have allowed an effective policy at the Department of Justice and the FBI of non-responsiveness. And I'll tell you how bad it is. The chairman actually brought the Deputy Attorney General into a meeting with me, thank you for that courtesy, at my request, because we were getting no answers to QFRs, no answers to letters, just a complete blow-off. If I recall correctly, that meeting was in June. You know how many answers I've gotten since June? After that meeting with the Deputy Attorney General about unanswered questions? None. 0. So you all have set one heck of a precedent if you think you're going to come back with questions about the Biden Department of Justice. You have set a precedent that the Department of Justice and the FBI don't have to answer our questions. And that if you're in the majority, that's cool. You're just going to let that ride. So I have to take this opportunity to ask some back questions to a former FBI official, because we don't have that. So let me ask Mr. McCabe, the FBI does pretty much everything by policy and procedure, in my recollection as a U.S. attorney working with FBI agents. Were there FBI policies and procedures related to how a tip line operates?
Yes, sir. Yeah, there are policies about that.
And where would I go to find those policies and procedures? I was able to find one statement on the internet. Are you aware of other places that we should go to look more specifically, since we haven't been able to get straight answers?
I don't know if I can give you the perfect place to look, but the tip line, the way the FBI handles tip lines has changed a lot in the last 5 or so years. So they're all managed centrally out of our facility in West Virginia that kind of handles all the incoming calls and then sends leads or information, directs it to the field offices that would be responsible for following up on those things. So
who has authority to set one up? Who makes the call? An agent says, I want a tip line on this case. Where does that decision travel through the FBI? You don't get a tip line in every case. You get tip lines in some cases. Why? How does that work?
Typically, the Office of Public Affairs would be involved in that suggestion, and that kind of, hey, if it's a particular case that we think requesting the public's active involvement will help.
So the agent would ask his agent in charge, and the agent in charge would clear it with the Public Affairs Office, and then the process for a tip line kicks in?
That's the best of my recollection, sir.
Okay. And then once the tip line is up and running and information starts to come in, what does it look like when you're going through those tips? Obviously, a lot of them are going to be just nutty people calling in. Some of them are going to have very significant evidence potentially in them, and you're going to have to go and dig into that. Who oversees that to make sure that that is legitimate and that evidence is actually being dug out of a tip line call?
So those calls, once the line is set up, those calls would go into our Criminal Justice Information Services Division in West Virginia. And the telephone the operators, the specialists who answer those calls, have a process for how they memorialize the information that comes off that tip and who it gets sent to, and whether it should be brought to someone's attention immediately if it's something that involves possibly a threat to life. So there are kind of detailed policies around that. I'm not really in a position to be able to tell you great detail about them off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm over my time, so let me ask a last very short question, and that is, if an FBI tip line were set up and information were collected through that FBI tip line, and then nobody looked at what had been brought in, it was just all dumped in a file and there was no further investigative work at all, would that be consistent with FBI policy or procedure?
From the way you've described the situation, sir, I'd have to say no. I'm not aware of a specific situation that fits that model, but presumably the information that comes in off the tip line gets put into our Guardian system, and that's how all of our incoming tip information is managed and assigned and investigated at its most kind of initial level. So no, information that comes into the FBI should never just be put aside and not followed up on.
Thank you, Chairman, for the extra time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as to the antitrust issue you've been talking about, the committee deserves to have a hearing on that. We had the Barrett nomination, so I'm going to get with Senator Lee and make sure that we can, in a reasonable fashion, get answers to the questions you've raised. I think we owe that to not only you, but the committee itself.
Hearings can be pretty meaningless if we haven't been given any documents,
no,
if we've been blown off by the FBI.
We've got
or
some
DOJ.
time
Again,
left, and we will look into that. As to Justice Kavanaugh, I think you got a, from my point of view, pretty good scrutiny. So, Senator Tillis. Nope. Who we got? Grassley. I overlooked the soon-to-be chairman.
During the course of Crossfire Hurricane, the Obama administration used FISA process as a weapon against candidate Trump and then later President Trump. Doing so undermined his presidency from the start. We voted in the Senate on legislation that would repair many of the shortcomings in the current FISA court system, striking a balance of increasing accountability, transparency, and ensuring fairness while protecting our national security interest. Congress must ensure that the FISA process isn't abused for partisan political gain like it was during the Obama administration. So now, Mr. McCabe, to my first question, the Inspector General found 17 errors and omissions in the Carter Page FISA application. There were also over 50 errors and omissions in the Woods file for the Page FISA application. In light of these overwhelming mistakes, the obvious lack of evidence, and the failure to fully apprise the FISA court of relevant exculpatory facts, the investigation simply didn't have foundation to proceed. If you were diligent doing the job, how did you miss all of these critical mistakes and failures that have tarnished the FBI for probably years to come?
Well, I don't agree with your characterization of the investigation being illegitimate or flawed. There are clearly the flaws that you have referenced, the ones pointed out by the IG, should not have taken place in the FISA application, which was only one part of an overall investigation into Mr. Page and 3 other individuals. An investigation that I would point out the IG indicated was for an authorized purpose, properly predicated.
According to the Inspector General, the Steele dossier was central and essential to the Carter Page FISAs. However, according to your testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, the dossier wasn't fully vetted and corroborated before it was used in the FISA application. Why didn't you ensure that the FBI performed its due diligence before the dossier was used to justify invasive surveillance on an American citizen?
The FBI is not required by the court to only present information that has been absolutely verified and proven true. We often use information that we have not yet gotten to the bottom of. We are required to provide information about the source of that information so that the court is adequately aware of, what we know about what we've told them and how we think about its verification. In this case, we were in the middle of a very long and extensive effort trying to prove the many allegations in the Steele reporting.
On January 4th, 2017, the FBI prepared a memo to close the Flynn case and noted no derogatory information was identified. That same day, Mr. Struck interceded to keep it open. Did you order Struck or anyone else to keep it open? If not, who did?
I don't recall ordering Peter to keep, or Mr. Struck to keep that investigation open. I think that obviously that's what happened, but I don't know who gave that order.
Okay. Did anyone ever instruct you to keep the Flynn case open? If so, who?
No one ever instructed me to keep the Flynn case open. We had conversations about the Flynn case towards the end of 2016 and whether or not we should keep it open. There was some thought that we had not developed much information about it during the course of the information and that it might be appropriate to close the case. However, those thoughts changed as soon as we became aware that we had evidence of General Flynn's conversations with the Russians. So our initial concern that General Flynn might be the point of contact between the Trump campaign and the Russians was elevated when we found evidence that he was in fact in touch with the Russians.
During your time at the FBI, how many Logan Act investigations were you a part of?
I do not recall ever having been a part of a Logan Act investigation.
Based on the evidence I've seen, much of which has been made public, the FBI was out to get Flynn, and they broke every rule in the books to interview him and try to entrap him. What the Obama administration and FBI did to Flynn under your watch is a textbook example of the power the federal government can be abusive and hurt the American people. Now going to leaks, the subject leaks, L-E-K-S. I've made this point before, but it's frustrating when the FBI refuses to answer this committee's questions in full, but leaks relevant information to the media. I asked then Director Comey in May 2017 whether he ever served as an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or Clinton investigation. His response, quote unquote, never. So next question to you, Deputy Director McCabe, was that a true and accurate answer based on your experience working for him?
Well, first, Senator, to be clear, I strongly disagree with your characterization of our investigation of General Flynn. But with respect to your question about Mr. Comey's testimony to you about being the source of anonymous leaks, I don't have any I don't have any information about that. I don't know.
In that same May 27th, 2017 hearing, I asked then Director Comey whether he authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or Clinton investigation. His answer was no. So, Mr. McCabe, was that a true and accurate answer based on your experience of working for him?
I am not aware of Director Comey authorizing or directing people to be anonymous sources for the media.
The Justice Department's Inspector General report on your disclosing of information to the media, lack of candor or lying under oath, contained references to a Clinton Foundation investigation. Specifically, that report said that you had a conversation with a Justice Department official about the Clinton investigation, and in that conversation you reportedly stated, quote, "Are you telling me that I need to shut down a valid predicated investigation?" End of quote. Why did you believe the Clinton Foundation investigation was validly predicated?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question because it's first beyond the scope of what we were told I'd be questioned about today, and also it would call for me to reveal information that I'm not sure the FBI, I haven't been authorized by the FBI to discuss. But I would point out, Senator, that the director and the deputy director of the FBI are the only two FBI officials who have the authority and the responsibility to authorize the release of information to the media. And so I think that's your questions are overlooking that important distinction. So that's it.
All right.
My time's
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar, we'll go to you in a second. I just want to, based on what you said, you say that you present information to court sometimes it's not fully proven. Is that right when it comes to a warrant?
That's correct. We often present information in warrants that we have not yet finished verifying.
Do you have an obligation when you find information exculpatory to provide it to the court?
In the FISA process, agents are obligated to present information that might cut against the veracity of a source, or you're obligated to present information that puts the court in a position to accurately assess whether they believe the source information you've presented.
So that's why if you alter an email from the CIA saying that Mr. Page actually was a source, that's misleading to the court, and that's why Mr. Kleinsmith's being prosecuted. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And finally, we'll go to, when you have information in the possession of the FBI in January and March, where the subsource basically disavows the legitimacy of the dossier, a lot of it's bar talk and hearsay, can you tell us how that never made it to you by June of 2017? How could that information been gathered in January and March of 2017 and not known to the system as late as June 2017? Do you know? Did you talk to Mr. Alton about this at all?
I'm not sure. I don't. I'm not sure who that was you just referred to, but I can't say.
Excuse me. The June-March interview of the subsource by the FBI was conducted by Mr. Alton and a few other agents, and that's when the subsource told us basically that a lot of it was bar talk, hearsay, gutted the reliability of it. My question is, you've said if you'd known then what you know now, you wouldn't sign the warrant application. Do you have an explanation as to why that information never made it to you and others?
No, sir, but I think that the team, there is no question that the Crossfire team should have had a much more thorough conversation with the Department of Justice attorneys who were responsible for preparing that package. They should have had full visibility on those facts and made an informed decision as to whether or not they should have been included in the package.
And your testimony is that no one told you about these interviews, the substance of them. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. McCabe. Good to see you. This hearing was set up before this election. I know that. But since we got the notice on this hearing, we now know that we have a new president, President-elect Biden, and a new vice president that we will see in Washington, and that is Vice President-elect Harris. And I just want to make clear to anyone watching this right now out there in the virtual land that this is all about what happened before the 2016 election. Is that correct, Mr. McCabe? And around that time period?
That's correct.
Okay. And in the 2016 election, Donald Trump won and Hillary Clinton lost. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, that's the correct answer, right? So now we move forward to this election in 2020, and we have a situation where our very democracy has spoken. We've had the greatest number of people that voted ever in a presidential election. Are you aware of that, Mr. McCabe?
Yes, ma'am. I'm aware of that.
And do you think there were some improvements made on how we handled foreign interference in the election?
I think it seems, of course, I'm not privy to all the information about what folks know and what steps they took, but it does seem to me that the efforts to bring greater security to our elections at the state level was time and effort well spent.
Yes, and I personally think there's a lot more that needs to be done. Senator Graham and I have the Honest Ads Act, which I think would be really helpful for ads that are political ads that are taken out to make sure. I think you're aware of that bill. And I think there's a lot more that can be done, but I think it's really important to note that the subject that we're talking about predates the 2016 election. And I want to talk about what's happening right now with the Justice Department and our election. And I really do it in light of what Vice President Biden said on Saturday night to the nation. He asked that the grim era of demonization be behind us. I'm sure that might have resonated with you a bit, Mr. McCabe. And that we, understanding that some people didn't agree with him and voted for Donald Trump, but he literally reached out to people who voted for Donald Trump. And he said, look, I've been disappointed before. I've lost elections, but I'm asking you to give me a chance and I'll give you a chance. And so that is the approach that I take here. And I know that it's hard to lose elections, but I think that we need to move on as a country, the pandemic, everything that we have before us, and really the integrity of our justice system. And I was actually very disheartened yesterday when Attorney General Barr sent out a memo to the U.S. attorneys throughout the country, asking them to examine voting irregularities even before the states had certified their results. And I had actually done a letter back on October 23rd when he started questioning mail-in ballots early on, and asked them to look at this because the federal prosecution of elections, the Justice Department's policy says, quote, overt criminal investigative measures should not be taken, quote, until the election in question has been concluded, its results certified, and all recounts and election contests concluded. So what happened yesterday is they decided to upend that policy and start getting on this train that there was something wrong with this election, when in fact the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia has stood by their election and says there isn't systematic fraud. The Republicans in Arizona, the governor there, this is a state where Joe Biden basically has won with a few more votes to be counted. You look at what happened in Pennsylvania. So my concern is they're upending this longstanding policy right when the election, resulting in a career prosecutor, Mr. Pilger, I don't know if you know him, resigned yesterday because he saw this clearly, this is a reason for his resignation, as political interference in the work of the Justice Department. So you spent decades in public service, Mr. McCabe, and I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to see a career Justice Department employee resign like that?
Well, I think it's incredibly concerning. As undoubtedly, Senator, you know from your own experience that people in the Department of Justice are typically committed to long and noble service. It's not just a job; it's a calling. It's what you choose to do with your life. So when people start resigning in protest over decisions that leadership makes, I think we should all take a very, very close look at that. In terms of election fraud generally, well, anytime you change a well-known, established policy regarding the political process in the middle of the political process, I think it raises some very legitimate concerns about what the motivation for that change was. And I think in the least case, it shines a very dim light on the department and its impartiality.
And with a new president coming in, what steps do you think we should be taking to restore public confidence in the department and improve morale in the department?
You know, I think from my own experience, I look back on my own experience and some of the decisions we made in the FBI, and of course, many of the things that have happened since. And, you know, I think a return to the time-honored principles in the department and in the Bureau of being very careful about what we do and how we do it around the political process is, I think that's something that most people in the department and the Bureau would really embrace.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. McCabe. Thank you very much.
Sure. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCabe, welcome. I'd like to start by discussing the Flynn investigation. As you know, the FBI team investigating General Flynn prepared a memo dated January 4th, 2017 to close the investigation into Flynn as lacking any basis to continue. The FBI had investigated and failed to find any derogatory information about General Flynn and determined he was no longer a viable candidate for investigation. But then, according to Peter Strzok, the seventh floor, the top brass at the FBI intervened to keep the investigation open. Were you the one who made the decision to keep the investigation open?
I don't remember making that decision, but I certainly supported keeping the case open. I don't remember being the person that made that phone call, but I think that it was the right move to continue investigating once we had uncovered the information that we found.
So, despite the fact that the career investigators concluded that there was no basis and no derogatory information and recommended closing it, you made the decision, or at least you agreed with the decision to keep the investigation open. On what basis?
Well, I don't know that. I don't recall that the investigators determined there was no basis to continue. My recollection from the conversations we were having about the Flynn case.
The memo is a memo to close the investigation because it could not find any, quote, derogatory information about Flynn, and he was, quote, no longer a viable candidate for investigation. That's not ambiguous, is it?
No, that's not the same as what you said before. And I, of course, don't have that memo in front of me, but our feeling at that time was that we had found very little, if any, incriminating evidence about General Flynn, until, of course, we found potentially very incriminating evidence about him.
Are you referring to the Logan Act theory?
No, sir. I'm referring to the fact that we uncovered that General Flynn was having the sort of direct contact with the government of Russia that we were looking for in all of the first 4 cases of Crossfire Hurricane.
Did you support using the Logan Act as a basis to go after General Flynn?
The Logan Act was not used as a basis to go after General Flynn. We opened the case.
You're aware of the White House meeting where the notes show that Vice President Biden at the time directly suggested using the Logan Act to go after General Flynn?
I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware of that. Well, those are notes from your colleagues.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I do.
Senator, I can say what the reasons that I agreed with and approved opening the case, and that was because we thought that General Flynn might be having inappropriate contacts with Russia. That's why we opened the case.
Inappropriate. So the only basis, this is a decorated 3-star general. The only basis that was put forward for what I think was a bogus political persecution and prosecution was an alleged violation of the Logan Act, which has never been used to prosecute anybody in the history of the Department of Justice. True?
No, I don't believe that's true. I think if you
Name
look
one
at
person
the-
that's ever been prosecuted under the Logan Act.
No, I was referring to why we opened the case against General Flynn. I'm not aware of prosecutions of the Logan Act.
I think for those who are listening, we're talking about a conversation between General Flynn and the Russian ambassador after the election, while he's the national security advisor in waiting. Is that correct, Senator Cruz?
We are. He's the incoming national security advisor. And Mr. McCabe, yesterday on MSNBC, Ben Rhodes, the former deputy national security advisor to President Obama, said that foreign leaders are already having conversations with Joe Biden, quote, talking about the agenda they're going to pursue January 20th. Mr. McCabe, based on that testimony, do you believe Joe Biden is violating the Logan Act?
I'm not aware of Ben Rhodes' statements or
Take it on
what
faith he
the-
said what I read. Assuming that quote is accurate, it's a verbatim quote, is that a violation of the Logan Act under any plausible theory?
I am not prepared to take your statement on faith. And I am also not prepared to conduct legal analysis.
All right, you're a
of the
lawyer.
Logan-
Have you ever answered a hypothetical in court? If it is
not gonna-
correct that I am accurately quoting it, something the Department of Justice frequently did wrong in this investigation, if that is what Ben Rhodes said, if Joe Biden is talking with foreign leaders right now, does it violate the Logan Act, yes or no?
I'm not going to opine on a hypothetical question about what the Biden
Okay,
campaign.
he is
might
talking
or
with
might
foreign
not.
leaders, and it doesn't violate the Logan Act because the Logan Act is unconstitutional, which is why it's never been used to prosecute anyone. You authorized using it to go after General Flynn as part of a political persecution. I can give you the answer. Hell no, Joe Biden is not violating the Logan Act. The reason you won't say it is because that was your flimsy political basis to go after a decorated war hero because you disagreed politically with President Trump.
Sir, none of that is correct.
Which part? Pick any aspect.
We didn't investigate General Flynn because we were concerned that he might violate the Logan Act. We were concerned.
It
that
is your
General Flynn-
testimony the Logan Act was not a predicate for the FBI and DOJ investigation of General Flynn? Really?
There were no discussions of the Logan Act. to the best
There
of my
were no
recollection.
discussions of the Logan Act at the FBI or DOJ. That is your testimony under penalty of perjury before this committee. And I
Senator,
warn you,
if
there
you're
is
not-
abundant evidence that there were.
Senator, if you're not going to let me finish my answer, I'm not going to be able to accurately answer your question.
Please go ahead. What is your testimony? Is your testimony, you just said there was no discussion of the Logan Act. Does that remain your testimony?
No, Senator, that's where you cut off my testimony.
Please continue.
I would like to finish
Please
my answer.
continue.
Thank you. When we initiated the case against General Flynn, it was not initiated for or as a result of any discussion
Mr.
of the
McCabe,
Logan
you're being
Act.
non-responsive to the question. I didn't ask about the initiation. The Logan Act was a late pretext that was adopted after you investigated him and couldn't find anything, and the career investigators recommended closing it. All right, since my time is expiring, although the chairman took a little bit of my time, so I'm going to take a little bit of it back. Did James Comey authorize you to disclose information about the Clinton Foundation investigation to the press?
I didn't need James Comey's authorization.
I didn't ask if you
had
needed
the
it. I
authority.
asked, did he authorize you to disclose it? That's a yes or no question.
I authorized the disclosure. of
Okay,
that
you're still not
material.
answering my question.
authority.
Did James Comey know about it, and did he authorize it? Yes or no? Did he know about it?
To my recollection, sir, yes, he knew about it.
Did he authorize you? Did he in any way give you the green light explicitly or implicitly?
I didn't ask Jim Comey.
I'm not
for a
asking
green
whether
light.
you
I could-
asked. I'm asking, okay, according to the Washington Times, April 18th, 2018, Mr. McCabe insisted he told his boss that he had authorized disclosure about the Clinton investigation, but Mr. Comey has denied this claim. And Mr. McCabe told investigators that Mr. Comey knew he had authorized disclosure and agreed it was a good idea. Is that accurate? Is that your testimony to this committee?
That is my recollection.
So, you're aware that your testimony is 180 degrees opposite Mr. Comey's sworn testimony to this committee, in which he insisted he has never authorized anybody to leak to the press.
I'm not going to say what Director Comey said or didn't say to you. That would, however, your characterization of a leak is not accurate.
The FBI has records that will establish whether you're telling the truth or Mr. Comey's telling the truth. Do you believe the FBI should make those records public so if you're telling the truth, you can be vindicated, and if Mr. Comey's telling the truth, he can be vindicated?
I'm not sure what records you're referring to, Senator.
Any and all
we
emails,
are-
correspondence, records whatsoever indicating that Mr. Comey knew of your leaks and authorized them.
I would very much like to see those records as well.
As would I. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal, but I just want the American people to understand that was it wrong for General Flynn to talk to the Russian ambassador since he was going to be the new incoming national security advisor?
Is that a question to me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Our concerns about General Flynn's contact with Ambassador Kislyak was that the general might be maintaining some sort of hidden or deniable contact, and that he might have been the person in the campaign who coordinated efforts with the Russian government. The fact that General Flynn lied about his contacts with the Russians made it doubly concerning to us. The fact that General Flynn then lied to his boss, the vice president, about those contacts also was greatly concerning to us.
Well, let me just say this. General Flynn told the FBI agents, you have the transcripts, you know what I said. The FBI agents came back and said they didn't think he lied. But the problem we have here is this is after the election is over, that the National Security Advisor has every right in the world to be talking to foreign governments, foreign ambassadors. It's going on as I speak. I'm sure the Biden administration, believing they have won, is beginning to reach out to foreign governments to talk about their agenda, whether it be China or anybody else. This whole idea that you would surveil the incoming National Security Advisor after the election, after the professionals in the field said there's no there, bothers a lot of us. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCabe, let me give you an opportunity, since you've been interrupted by my colleague in the midst of actually threats of perjury, to clarify any of the answers or expand on them in any way that you would like. If there's anything you have to add, I'd welcome your remarks. If not, I'll turn to my question.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's important to keep in perspective that the FBI opens counterintelligence cases sometimes when they suspect that someone may have had inappropriate or improper or illegal contact with a foreign power. During the course of that investigation, if you confirm that that contact has taken place, and then you learn that that person is also actively concealing the contact, concealing it from, in General Flynn's case, the FBI, and also from the White House Chief of Staff, the White House Counsel's Office, and the Vice President, your fears about a possible threat to national security are justifiably elevated. That is what happened in this case. And so questions about a Logan Act prosecution that never took place, I think are misplaced.
That's a really important point, Mr. McCabe. I regret that my colleague isn't here to hear it, but I'm sure he'll review the record. That we should note, I think, at the beginning that we are now in the midst of a fourth hearing to investigate both the 2016 election and the investigations and investigators who themselves have already been investigated. So we're spending all the time in the world to look back at 2016 as families and businesses in Connecticut, and I think in the states of every one of my colleagues, are hanging by a thread due to the public health and economic crises caused by COVID. This crisis has been ignored and disregarded by this administration, which is the reason that President Trump was defeated. It is a dereliction of their duty to their constituents and to the American people to continue to focus on a 2016 investigation that already has been investigated. And I think your point about the reasons for that interest in the conversations between potential Trump officials and the Russian ambassador are very well taken. I also want to say that I am deeply troubled, as my colleagues are, by the statements made by Attorney General Barr, who again is acting apparently as a puppet of the president rather than a lawyer for the American people. He is throwing gasoline on the fires of false claims of fraud, fueling doubts and undermining faith in the integrity of our election process. There are no facts or evidence that justify an investigation. He knows it, but he is giving a patina of credibility to baseless and destructive accusations. I would suggest respectfully that Attorney General Barr has taken his office to a new law, and the ramifications are profound and dangerous for our country. This kind of scaremongering is no substitute for the truth. The fact is, the votes have been counted, and some are being counted. And they have shown and will continue to confirm that former Vice President Biden is in fact. But in the meantime, the litigation challenging the integrity of our election process will continue, frivolous and baseless though it is, and now apparently given more credibility by the Attorney General of the United States, regretfully and unfortunately. I want to ask you about a threat to our country that is real. Just a few months ago, the FBI director publicly testified to the House Committee on Homeland Security that, quote, racially motivated violent extremism, end quote, constitutes a majority of domestic terrorism threats. In fact, white supremacists in particular were responsible for 49 homicides in 26 attacks from 2000 to 2016. That's more than any other extremist movement. Recent attacks include the April 2014 mass shooting at a Jewish community center in Kansas, the June 2015 mass shooting at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, and others. Mr. McCabe, let me ask you, how long have we known that white supremacists and other far right-wing extremists pose significant domestic terrorism, national security, or public security and safety threats to the United States?
We've known about the threats posed to this country by domestic terrorists, and specifically white supremacists and right-wing groups for many years, certainly long before I even joined the FBI. And one of the seminal moments in my desire to join the organization was when I, like the rest of the country, sat in horror on the day that the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was destroyed in Oklahoma City. So this is not a new threat. I think what's new for the FBI right now is the focus and intensity they are bringing on this problem set, which is absolutely called for and necessary.
And when the president makes the kind of comments that he did, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, that a particular right-wing group should stand back and stand by, do those kinds of comments have an effect on those groups in encouraging them?
They absolutely do. Favorable references and shout outs and comments to these fringe groups have the effect of confirming their beliefs. They interpret these comments as signals and signs of approval and support, and really can risk putting more momentum and kind of fervor behind what they're planning to do.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. My time has expired. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think we're waiting to see.
Senator Graham?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, sir. Would it be possible just to take a
Oh,
brief
absolutely.
break?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. 5 minutes, is that okay?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. Thank you.
All right, so you're here. We're just doing a 5-minute break there, right here on News Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Page. Always great to be here with you as we have been listening to the Senate Judiciary hearing, really talking all about what led up in 2016 with this Russia investigation. How was it formed? Talking to the former FBI Deputy Director there, Andrew McCabe, as he's getting grilled by Senate GOPers. We will keep it right here on News Now from Fox. We are definitely going to be waiting for that 5 minutes. We'll bring it back to you soon as we see it. In the meantime, let's show you Senate GOP leaders talking about what's next in the legal challenges for President Trump. Let's listen.
Exactly whether we'll be in the majority or not, which will be answered in Georgia on January 5th. We have one member of our team that's brand new, Senator Rick Scott from Florida, who will take over the NRSC. I'm going to call on each of my members for a couple of words, and we'll take a couple of questions, and then we'll see you again after lunch. John Thune.
Thank you, Leader, and congratulations to you and to all of our members of our leadership team. This is a terrific leadership team and a wonderful conference, very diverse conference, and we got some great new members. We're excited to get to work, to take on the challenges that face the American people. It's I think the election made it very clear that people across this country reject the agenda that was put forward by the Democrats. If you look at the defund the police movement, the Green New Deal movement, all those things, it was pretty clear that voters across this country said we don't want anything to do with that, which is why I believe we had wins in the House and why people we expect in the end are going to support a divided government by giving us the majority in the United States Senate. So we have a terrific team to work with, and we got our leadership elections done today, and this team is ready to go to work on behalf of the American people.
I appreciate the opportunity to continue as chairman of the Republican Conference for the next 2 years. We have 4 new members who are part of the conference discussions today and are great additions, and I'm especially happy to have Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming joining me. She is the first woman elected to the United States Senate from Wyoming in our 130 years as a state. We still have a couple of races in Georgia. Our candidates are very tough people, and they know how to run tough races, and I expect victories there. We did learn some lessons from this election, that there was a rejection of this very liberal approach by the Democrats far to the left. They've rejected the defund the police, rejected expanding the size of the Supreme Court beyond the 9. They've rejected forcing us to stop producing American energy. As Republicans, we're going to keep talking about the things that we believe people at home believe is important to them, which is getting back to work, getting our kids safely back to school, and getting this coronavirus disease behind us, and that is what the Republican Conference is going to continue to talk about.
I was pleased to be elected policy chairman again. What we saw in this last campaign was that candidates really matter, but what you're for also really matters. I think that's one of the reasons that virtually every predictor of what was going to happen in the elections was wrong. You know, the president wasn't defeated by huge numbers. In fact, he may not have been defeated at all. We gained seats in the House. We are going to hold the majority in the Senate. Hispanic Americans voted for Republicans in ways that they have not ever done before. African American women, young African American men below, say, 35, high percentages of them, way beyond expectations, voted for our candidates, voted for the president. I think if you're a Republican in the Senate today, if you're a Republican in the Congress today, there are incredible opportunities out there as we look at what voters said they didn't want, but also what voters clearly said they do want. They want more opportunity. They want more fairness. They want a strong economy. They don't want the regulators to regulate us out of business. We want every regulation we need and not a single regulation we don't need. They'd like to see what happened in the first 3 years of the Trump administration continue to happen. That's a message that we all need to pay close attention to. High employment numbers, low unemployment numbers among every group in America, and voters defied every predictor when they came to the polling place and said, this is what we want to see more of.
First, I'm very thankful to have made it through another election season and on to my second term in the United States Senate. So to the people of Iowa, I'm very honored to be able to serve you again for 6 more years. For this leadership team and for my Republican conference, I want to say thank you so much for once again electing me as vice chair of the Republican conference. It is such a tremendous opportunity for me to be able to take the stories that I get, and you hear me talk about it all the time, but I'm so proud of the 99 county tour that I do every single year, that Chuck Grassley has done for 40 years, to be able to gather those stories from Iowans and take their opportunities and their challenges and their voices and lay it out with the members of this leadership team to make sure that they are represented here to the best of my ability in the United States Senate. One also, you'll recognize as the only female member of the leadership team, it is a great honor to be able to project a conservative woman's voice on the national stage, and recognizing that this may have been the GOP year for our women, and again, just adding an additional voice for them as we continue to move through this next term. But again, just so grateful, first again, people of Iowa, and then to the members of my conference for re-electing me, putting their trust and confidence in me for this position as vice chair. Thank you.
First off, it's a real honor to get elected to do this job. It's a hard job. I'm going to take it very seriously. I know the job is to make sure we have a Republican majority in the Senate. First, we've got to go win in Georgia, and we're going to win in Georgia. We all heard what the Democrats are going to do. Chuck Schumer said if he can take Georgia, he can change America. And we know what the Democrat changes are. Medicare for All, which is going to take away private health insurance for 150 million Americans. The Green New Deal, which is going to ruin our economy. It's a $100 trillion expenditure. The socialism, reduce funding for the police. All these things are going to change America that we all grew up in, that we all want to keep. We've got great candidates for the 22 cycle. We're going to recruit others, and we're going to continue to have a Republican majority after the Georgia races and at the end of 22.
We're going to have another stakeout after lunch. I've got to go open the Senate, but I will take a couple quick ones.
What does it say about America that heads of states from around the world have congratulated President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, and Republican leadership has been elected to do so? Are you all afraid of President Trump?
Well, what it says about America is that until the Electoral College votes, anyone who's running for office can exhaust concerns about counting in any court of appropriate jurisdiction. It's not unusual. It should not be alarming. At some point here, we'll find out finally who was certified in each of these states, and the Electoral College will determine the winner, and that person will be sworn in on January 20th. No reason for alarm. I don't think anything that's occurred so far interrupts an ordinary process of moving through the various steps that I indicated and allowing, if there is a new administration, it to work through the transition. All of these steps will be taken at the appropriate time. All of these steps will be taken at the appropriate time. Now, I'm going to go over and open the Senate. We have another stakeout after lunch, and I'll be happy to.
And we continue to roll right on here on News Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Page. Always great to be here with you. Thank you again for joining us here today as we really try to bring you the feeds that are coming live right now and really indirect right for you. You get to see it, not a soundbite, not a couple of sound bites, but really trying to show you the event in its entirety, and we do a great job at that right here on News Now from Fox. We're going to we'll take you back out to Capitol Hill right now, live where the Senate Judiciary hearing continues on the investigation of the FBI as well as the investigation there into the Russia probe. Let's listen in right here. This is all live on News Now from Fox.